St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica, August 3rd, 1897. A boy follows his father, a stonemason, into a graveyard. It's the first time his father has reached out for help, and he's excited to be assisting the man he's idolized his whole life. They proceed to dig a grave, and once finished, his father makes an odd request for the boy to climb down to the bottom of the grave. Thinking it odd, but still wanting to make his father proud, he climbs down into the hole. But then once at the bottom, he watches as his father pulls up the ladder. Not sure exactly what was happening, the boy cries out and begs to be let out of the grave, but to no avail. After a few moments, he goes quiet, listening for a response. But it became clear that his father has gone. Eventually, the boy realizes what he must do, and scrapes and climbs at the earth, until after what felt like an eternity, he reaches the top. A harsh lesson of self-reliance that the stonemason meant to teach his son. And for better or worse, one he would never forget. That boy would go on to become one of the most controversial civil rights leaders in history. A man that would preach a gospel of racial pride and self-reliance to millions, and a man who would urge defiance and separatism in the face of oppression. A man named Marcus Garvey. Thanks so much to CuriosityStream for supporting our discussions of important historical stories. Marcus Mosiah Garvey was born in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica in 1887, growing up under two opposing influences. His father, who you saw in the beginning of this episode, who stressed education but was cold-hearted, and his mother, whose kindness and encouragement fostered monumental confidence. Growing up, Garvey encountered racism from his white teachers, and because of restrictions within the Jamaican school system, would be forced to leave school at the age of 14. Then, becoming a printer's apprentice with his uncle Kingston, he learned a trade that taught him the power of the written word, a power he would wield in years to come. At age 23, Marcus traveled to Central America, where he witnessed how colonialism kept black people isolated within certain areas, often living in squalor, while they simultaneously provided the back-breaking labors that kept national economies thriving. And 4 years later, he discovered the book that would act as the final piece in puzzling out his worldview, Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. Washington's book, coupled with his previous experiences, inspired his philosophy of black nationalism, and Garvey wanted to unify black people and put an end to their mistreatment worldwide. Then, returning to Jamaica in 1914, he fell in love with another young activist named Amy Ashwood, who he wooed while the couple teamed up to form the Universal Negro Improvement Association. But while the UNIA developed a following, Garvey increasingly made enemies by attacking other black leaders and their integrationist views. And when his lack of business savvy led him to being confronted over financial irregularities, he set sail for America. Upon his arrival, with the help of fellow activist A. Philip Randolph, he set himself up in Harlem, New York. And soon after, he would begin traveling and speaking, all the while observing the plight of African Americans. Then in 1917, when East St. Louis erupted into a massive race riot, with white mobs murdering hundreds of blacks, Garvey made a call for violent retaliation, directly contrasting with leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, whose NAACP opted to hold a silent march in honor of the St. Louis victims. And once again, Garvey's criticism from established black leaders alienated him from integrationists like Du Bois, and even Randolph eventually disavowed him. Only at this point, things were a little different, because now he had an ever-growing audience. A fire was burning, and Marcus Garvey had the gasoline. In speeches and newspaper articles for the UNIA paper, The Negro World, he would stress his belief that all blacks must unite globally, and black men should be prepared to meet oppression with force. He also encouraged confidence in black women, stressing that they too should be protected, and that their beauty was a thing to be celebrated. And he reminded black Americans that they were privy to the legacy of Africa, and came from something greater than the deceptive stereotypes white culture had taught them. And he toured this message throughout the U.S., electrifying thousands and establishing new UNIA chapters. With 35 cents, anyone from African descent could join. Garvey also distributed uniforms and titles, and his Garveyites took to the streets during both scheduled and spontaneous marches, and his followers would wait for new issues of his newspaper, hanging on every word. When World War I ended, and it was clear that Europe and America stood poised to take further advantage of Africa's resources through colonialism, Garvey began pushing the idea of Africa for Africans. And the reach of his message extended even further, as black soldiers returned from the war to find their dreams of equality still dashed. Garvey spoke to their frustrations. Meanwhile, the U.S. government began becoming more aware of Marcus Garvey and the power he wielded. So they began an investigation on him, led by none other than J. Edgar Hoover, a man who would eventually go on to become the director of the FBI and the black community's personal boogeyman for decades. Granted, in 1919, he was just a special assistant to the Attorney General, focused on political radicalism. And prior to later events in his career, like his men bugging the hotel rooms of Dr. King, encouraging the rift between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad, and sending infiltrators into the Black Panther Party, Hoover cut his teeth investigating Garvey. And once again, Garvey's lack of business savvy would be his undoing. While he'd managed to create businesses with UNIA funds, many of them were mismanaged, since Garvey had a habit of putting ill-equipped loyalists in key positions. And while many of his Harlem-based businesses teetered on the edge of ruin, it would actually be his vision for a cruise ship line that would finally, well, sink him. Months into a stock offering for his Black Star Line, Garvey purchased a 33-year-old coal boat he planned to retrofit into a cruise ship. After some hiccups, the ship made it to Cuba and Costa Rica, but Black Star Line would turn out to be no more than a very expensive symbolic gesture, because Garvey would be betrayed by people Hoover planted inside the UNIA. After gaining his trust, they tricked him into paying 6 times what the ship was worth, and later on, any other boats he acquired would be hobbled by saboteurs, damaging engines and fuel tanks. Yet despite all this, in August of 1920, Garvey's UNIA still hosted a month-long convention held in both Harlem's Liberty Hall and at Madison Square Garden. Thousands of delegates showed up, and Garvey publicly handed out unconventional and even silly-sounding titles. He named himself the Provisional President of Africa, and the delegates created a document titled the Black Declaration of Rights, declaring the UNIA a monarchy in exile that would someday petition the League of Nations to hand over its African colonies. Garvey also sent people to Liberia to begin laying the groundwork for an independent black nation, a homeland he hoped that all black people could eventually settle, though it should be noted that the government of Liberia did not approve. Some months later, Garvey's forward progress was halted, because in January of 1922, Hoover and the U.S. government finally got him. With the Black Star Line nearly bankrupt, Garvey sent out flyers petitioning new investors with an image of a boat he hadn't yet paid for. But when it was revealed that that image of the unpurchased boat was doctored with the name of poet Phyllis Wheatley etched into the photograph as if it were the name of the ship, that minuscule fact gave investigators the leeway they needed to accuse Garvey of trying to deceive investors. He was charged with mail fraud and arrested. And while out on bail, Garvey made the horrible decision of meeting with the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, even inviting the man to speak at Garvey's rallies. Given his own championing of the Back to Africa movement, Garvey probably thought it made sense to team up with another segregationist. But this association simply provided ammunition to his critics in the black community. Then in 1923, Garvey made yet another poor decision: to represent himself in court. Convicted and given a 5-year sentence, President Calvin Coolidge pardoned Garvey after only 2.5 years, but only so the government could deport him. He'd received a hero's send-off in New Orleans and a hero's welcome back in Kingston, where he would have 2 sons with his second wife following his divorce of Ashwood. And finally, after suffering a series of strokes, he eventually died in London in 1940 at the age of 52. Ironically, the final stroke was brought on when he'd read a premature obituary that claimed he'd died broke and abandoned by his followers. Garvey's worldview, however, lived on. Malcolm X, himself a son of a murdered UNIA member Earl Little, adopted many Garveyisms. Also, Kwame Nkrumah, who led the Gold Coast to independence from Britain, named Garvey as one of his influences. And back home in Jamaica, he was declared their first national hero and was reinterred at a shrine in their National Heroes Park. Marcus Garvey was a separatist, a grave distinction between himself and the more often discussed civil rights leaders. And while his views, stubbornness, and questionable decisions definitely made him enemies, he was right to fight against the oppression that he saw. And in the end, some of his ideas, just like that young boy in the graveyard so long ago, eventually clawed their way to the surface and helped guide many others in changing the world. And you know, our ability to continue to tell important historical stories is substantially increased thanks to the good folks over at Nebula. Thanks to Nebula support, we're able to offer a ton of extra credits, extra history, and extra mythology episodes, all ad-free on their platform, as well as a few Nebula originals, such as the extra history Tipu Sultan, Tiger, or Tyrant, and my episode of their working title series where I get to jam about the opening sequence of Cowboy Bebop. Yeah, I promise I don't butcher Yoko Kanno's iconic theme over there. We love Nebula because they're a by creators for creators streaming service, featuring original content from some of our favorite educational entertainers on the internet, such as Renee Ritchie, Tierzu, and Princess Weeks. And you know who else loves independent educational creators? CuriosityStream. So much so, in fact, that they've teamed up with us over at Nebula to offer a phenomenal 2-for-1 deal. Meaning sign up for CuriosityStream using our link in the description, and they'll throw in a matching Nebula subscription for free. Sorry. If you're new to the game, CuriosityStream is an online learning platform where you can watch thousands of amazing documentaries and award-winning original series. One we just enjoyed was Lincoln's Last Night, a CuriosityStream feature documentary that follows the 16th president of the United States' early years as a rising politician through his presidency, the Civil War, and all the way to his untimely death. Ooh, and with a 96% like ratio, seems like a lot of other people are liking it as well. So head over to curiositystream.com/extra credits right now to get both of these amazing resources for only $14.97 for an entire year. And that's 26% off the regular price. Not to mention, you'll be helping out our channel in the process. Thanks, Space Cowboys. Sorry, not sorry. That's right, Zoe. Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Mustia, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blaine, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels1 are fantastic legendary patrons.